If you asked me, vintage glass is the best glass. And in today's video, we are going to be testing and pitting these two wonderful vintage lenses against each other. In a true shootout style, we're going to test this Canon 55mm f1.2 against this Minolta Rokkor 55mm f1.7. Both Canon and Minolta Rokkor glass are known for their quality and superior image rendering. Being vintage glass, they do have character, and it is characters that make a story great. We're going to look at these two vintage lenses, and we're going to see what makes them good, what can make them bad, and they're bokeh. In this test of the good, the bad, and the bokeh, we have returned to the Bokeh Corral. We were here last year to do another lens test with two vintage lenses. This time they're a little more evenly matched. We have the Minolta 55mm and the Canon 55mm prime lenses. An old friend of mine and subscriber to this channel suggested last time we did the shots in the Bokeh Corral that we have the fence trailing off into the distance. And that's what we've set up here in this shot. Even on this overcast, low contrast day, setting the camera to ISO 200, we still have at f2.8 a 12/50th of a second. In our attempts to continue to show the bokeh of these lenses, if we're doing the good, the bad, and the bokeh, what more appropriate place to demonstrate the bokeh but a cemetery? I've got it mounted on the Joykan tripod, which I still really enjoy. And we have chosen this monument marker right here. It looks like Captain W. Davis. 1872. We'll be focused on this area of the monument right here and looking at some of the highlights and the speculars in the background, because that's what I want to see. Any comparison between these two lenses is what happens to those specular highlights when we're out of focus. Again, we're going to run through the apertures from f2 all the way up through f16 and compare these two incredible vintage lenses. First up, the Canon 55mm. Now we have the Minolta Rokkor 55mm f1.7 mounted on the Fujifilm. This area that we've just driven through is known as Beards Hills, and we've come here a few times before. I've come here before to do some autumnal photographs. In fact, it was last year. We did some very, very beautiful photos here. I had this incredible idea that we would use the drone and do a shot up high above. There's a S curve to go through, and I had this envision, like in the car ads, where the cars are streaming down the road so quick and so fast with leaves flying. I just had this beautiful vision of that happening. So I went into one of the pull-offs, I launched the drone up and went up what I thought was high enough, and then started going over to where I thought the road was. But I had gone too far over. We call this area Beards Hills because obviously there's slope to the ground, and the road is carved along and the slope went up. Wasn't even thinking I was too far and over the road, and I was actually in the tree line across the road. Flew the drone, smashed into trees. This is what I have at the moment. In what is turning out to be one of the most expensive vlogs that I have done, we have returned to Beards Hills for the final experiment with our two gunslingers about the bokeh of these two vintage lenses. This is a scene that I've set up right here. And as in the past, we're going to run through the different f-stops and look at how these two vintage lenses render the bokeh of the background. Let's take a closer look at some of those images, both from the Minolta Rokkor 1.7 and the Canon FL 1.2. On the screen right now is the image from that Minolta Rokkor f1.7 lens. Now let's fade into the Canon lens, and you can see a very much difference in the bokeh. Now that Canon lens is set at f1.2. Let's go back to the Minolta lens, and now back to the Canon lens, and you can see that the bokeh on the Canon lens is more of a bubble bokeh. Switching to a different scene, again we'll look at the difference between the bokeh of these two lenses wide open. First is the Minolta 1.7, and now the Canon 1.2. If you look at the foreground of the Canon, the depth of field is definitely shallower. But again, that Canon FL lens does demonstrate more of a bubble bokeh than the Minolta. Switching to f8, here we see the Minolta lens, and now the Canon. Back to the Minolta. f8 seems to really point out the differences in the bokeh between these two lenses. The Canon lens shows the specularity in a different way. It blooms more than the Minolta lens. Also, to my eye, the Canon lens in the high contrast areas and those out of focus bokeh areas in the back is a little more jittery, with the Minolta lens being a little more buttery. Let's go to f16 and zoom in. Another crucial difference between these two lenses is that the Canon lens definitely has more contrast and the blacks are deeper than that Minolta lens. Here they are, side by side.
There's two kinds of people in this world. Those who have vintage glass and those who dig for it.